Public Relations 101, How to Raise Your Congregation's Profile in Jewish and Secular Media. Our presenter for today is Annette Powers. Annette is the URJ's Public Relations and Communications Manager, a position she has held for close to 3 years. Prior to working at the URJ, Annette spent 4 years as the senior writer in the Communications Department of the Jewish Federations of North America. Annette is a graduate of the University of Michigan, and she also has a joint master's degree in nonprofit management and international communications at the American University in Washington. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Annette Powers.
Thank you, Victor, and welcome everyone. I'm excited that so many of you are on this call, on this webinar, and I encourage you, as Adam mentioned, to ask questions, and also my contact information is up here. It'll repeat at the end, but please feel free anytime to call or email me if you have questions. I'm more than happy to help all of you. So this is very much a 101. So for some people it'll be repeated information, and for some of you it will be new, and I'm trying to cover all the basics. I first want to talk about earned media, because in the PR world we talk a lot about earned media, and I think the rest of the world says, what does that mean? So earned media is publicity gained through promotional efforts other than advertising. So advertising is what you pay for, earned is what you get for free. Although, as you know, nothing really comes for free. So there's a lot of effort, time, energy, and even sometimes money spent in getting earned media. A lot of times people hire private PR consultants, or they pay PR professionals to try to get them earned media. But earned media includes editorial coverage in newspapers and magazines, interviews or event coverage on television and radio, postings on blogs, calendar listings, letters to the editor, op-eds, polls, mentions on social media. That could be Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, anywhere. Anywhere that you see coverage of an event, organization, etc., that is not a paid advertisement, that's what we would call earned media. Why do we need earned media? Well, the first and most important answer is because of budget. We don't, especially in the congregational world, as you know, most congregations don't have a very large advertising budget, if one at all. So if you want to get the word out about events that are taking place, new initiatives, or just about the congregation in general, we really have to rely on earned media to help get the word out. So the other reason that I think is overlooked a lot is the influence of earned media. That earned media, when people read something in an article about a congregation or an event, it has a lot more weight than if they see an advertisement, because even if it took all kinds of influencing to get that article in there and people don't really know what happened behind the scenes, there is a sense among the general reader that what's written in print is truth, and hopefully it is, and it's different. It has a different weight than a paid advertisement. So I'm going to go through all these steps to getting earned media, and I'm going to cover each one. So this is just sort of an overview. We're going to talk about press kits, building a press list, targeting the right media outlets, how to cultivate media relationships, how to develop a pitch, how to get the word out through press releases, media advisories, emails, follow-up, what to do with press at events, how to respond to breaking news and inquiries, how to write op-eds and letters to the editor, and then a very important step that a lot of people skip, I think in general, not just with PR, is how to evaluate, and why is it important to evaluate your progress. So the first thing is just to have a general press list, a press kit. So I think every congregation should have a press kit that, it could be filled with all kinds of different materials, but a general brochure about what your congregation is and any special programs. A fact sheet is always handy, especially for the press who are very limited on time. A fact sheet is usually one page that just gives the most basic information, like what kind of congregation it is, one paragraph history, the list of your top clergy, professionals, and lay leaders, and contact information. That's sort of just what you would have maybe on a home page of a website. You should have short biographies of clergy, staff, and key lay leaders, and a business card. It looks obvious and probably goes without saying, but I've seen many press kits that didn't have contact information for the It had the contact information in general for a congregation, but not for the right person on staff that a press person should contact. And you'll hear me repeating this over and over, but the most important thing when dealing with the press is make it easy. They're very busy people, and they have a lot of information being thrown at them all the time. So the easier you can make it for them to get the information and to get in touch with you, the better it is. So the second thing you want to do is have a press list that's sort of your general press list that you keep on hand at all times. There are times when you might need to build a niche press list, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's important to have an up-to-date press list of both Jewish and mainstream press, including daily newspapers, monthly magazines, local news websites, television and radio outlets, and bloggers. Bloggers are becoming more and more important all the time, so it's essential that you become familiar with who are the big names in your community in terms of blogging. So on your press list, you always want to have names and contact information. I have phone, email, and fax. Fax is a little bit outdated, but there are some places that are still using fax machines. So if you have that information, that's important. And you want people that aren't just, not just Jewish reporters, obviously, but news and assignment editors who are covering religion, local events, community issues. Some people are just covering a specific neighborhood, and those are good people to have on there, too. Try to keep up with the blogs, subscribing to any relevant blogs so you know what they're talking about. A lot of bloggers have RSS feeds, which means you can just sign up for it, and you will automatically get a note in your email about when they post to their blog. So I have niche press lists for specific events. That's like if you were doing a specific event, like an event about a book with an author, and it's probably going to be Jewish related, with somebody in your neighborhood or in your community, you might want to add people to your general press list that cover books, and that wouldn't be a person you'd normally send things to, and I would definitely create a separate list so that you're not then sending things to book editors that you wouldn't want on your press list normally, because then that will annoy them. The next thing is, besides building the press list, but really thinking about who's on your list, targeting the right outlets. This step actually kind of goes, they go hand in hand, building the press list and targeting the right outlets. So you want to determine who is the audience you're trying to reach and which press outlets reach that audience best. Sometimes having a more targeted list is better than just, having a huge press list where you're blanketing everything. Really picking, let's say, the top 10 and getting to know those reporters really well is you will get more bang for your buck in terms of your effort. Think about new media, trade publications, listservs, blogs. Some of the local blogs are actually have more of an impact for congregations than you might think. Than even like a mention in the daily newspaper that everyone reads, because it's so targeted and specific to your area that people go to those sources for their local community information more often than to the larger newspapers. And definitely, more and more everyone's using online and social media. So sometimes that would mean you can go on to, a local newspaper's website and post information about your own event. Post it there, tweet at them. Reporters and writers in general are using Twitter more and more, so tweeting at them is a really good way to get the word to them, but also to anybody who's reading their Twitter feed. And my colleague Kate Bigham will actually be doing a webinar in the future about social media, so I'm sure she'll have a lot more advice on that topic. The next really important step is cultivating relationships. So it's not just about building a list and then mass emailing a bunch of people sort of out into the darkness. Really, I think this is the most important thing you can do is build relationships with press. Get to know specific writers. It's a little tough out there right now because a lot of newspapers are closing and writers move around a lot. But especially in small communities, I find that a lot of the Jewish newspapers, it's the same writers for a long, long time. So the better you know them, the better they know you, the more success you'll have at getting coverage. Really understand what they're writing about, what their interests are, what's their beat. Follow their story so you have a better understanding of exactly what they cover. I think the one thing that bothers journalists the most is when people pitch to them things that they never write about, that's not what they're interested in or not what they cover. I hear that complaint from journalists all the time. So you want to get to know their work, but also get to know them as people. And the best way to do this, I think like anything, is through food. If you can invite a journalist to breakfast or lunch, they will usually say yes, because journalists are very underpaid and always like to have a free meal. That's my experience anyway. And it's really nice to get to know them as people, keep it casual. It's not a lunch or breakfast meeting with a member of the press isn't really the time to do a hard sell pitch. It's really more like a get to know you. And just a reminder to always bring business cards and press kits so they have that information readily available. So how do you develop a pitch? When you have some news to share about an event or an initiative, what's the best way to pitch that story to a member of the press? Well, the first thing is to think like them, not to think from your organization's point of view. It might sound obvious, but it's really a change of viewpoint. A lot of times people pitch what they're going on because they have a lot of pressure on them. We've got to get the word out about this event. This event, we need to get an audience there. Well, for a reporter, they don't usually care so much about one event, and they definitely don't care about filling the seats. What they care about is, why is this important to my reader? Why do people care? Why is it timely? Does it relate to a larger trend in the Jewish community or the religious world or the world at large? So you've got to try to see it from their point of view and from their reader's point of view. If you were a reader reading that newspaper, or if you were watching that TV program, why would you be interested? And that also relates to, what is the hook? What makes this story unique? So there are a lot of places that have a sisterhood luncheon. Why is this one special? It's got to be something really special to get a journalist's attention. You also want to make sure you write succinctly, clearly, and again, journalists are very busy and have a lot of information thrown at them, so the more concise you can be, the better. One of the main rules you always hear in journalism and writing in general is show, don't tell. And what that means is illustrate your points. Don't just tell the information, but illustrate points with personal stories, emotional anecdotes, and also data, statistics, those kind of things also illustrate a story. And building partnerships. I find that a lot of times when organizations are working together on an event, there's sometimes a competitive feeling where, oh, we don't want to share our press contacts, and let's get this press story. And it's a lot more powerful when you work together because, there's strength in numbers. It shows collaborative effort within the community. So you always want to work together if that's possible. So how do you get the word out? It's kind of at the same time as you have your pitch, but you also want to get the word out. So we're going to talk a little bit about press releases, media advisories, targeted emails, social media, phone calls, and just follow-up in general. So a press release is a PR person's #1 tool. Press releases are written in a very specific style, and I encourage you, if you don't have a lot of experience writing press releases, to just read as many press releases as you can to sort of get the idea of how a press release usually is. If you want to see examples from our website, you can always look on urj.org/press. But you can also go on websites like PR Newswire to see press releases from all kinds of companies and organizations all over the world. For example, but the most important thing about writing press releases is that it's in an objective voice. A press release is very different than an advertisement or a promotional email or something, or a flyer, anything like that. You usually avoid superlatives. Don't say, this is the best ever event of its kind. It's really supposed to be written sort of from the journalist viewpoint, which is more objective. And if you write it in a more promotional way, journalists get pretty turned off because they want, they say, I don't want to read a promotion. So try to keep it objective, informative. The beginning of a press release, and I'll show an example, but it should always sort of answer those main questions: who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how. So, and once you have a press release up, you really have to follow up. Make sure you have people on hand that could answer questions or be interviewed or respond with quotes and offer different ideas. So here's an example of a press release. This one is about our early childhood education conference. And as you see, the style is very, matter of fact. I did say this dynamic 3-day conference, which I guess you could call that's a subjective voice, but it sort of keeps it to the minimum. So you always have in the first line what they call the date line. In this case, where it says New York, New York, you usually have a date, then the city and state. We don't have the date there because our date is included in our header up above. You see January 24th. So you always have a headline, sometimes a subhead if you feel like the headline doesn't tell enough information. In this case, I didn't need a subhead. Your contact information very clearly at the top, always with an email and phone number. And then the press release, like I said, the first paragraph is always the basic information. Who was there? Where was it? When was it? What was it? And then going on with more details. This page gets cut off, but like I said, you can go on urj.org/press to see many examples. Most press releases include 1 or 2 quotes, usually from the, I would say, top-ranking official in the organization or the person most closely involved with whatever the project, initiative, or event was. Sometimes that's not the top person, but that's the person that really planned that project. And then oftentimes it's helpful to have a quote from a participant or somebody who's what I call an end user, somebody who got the benefit of whatever that program, initiative, or event was. And that's the part of a press release where you don't have to be subjective. That's the part where you can say, this was the best event ever, it was amazing, it built community, or whatever you want. And oftentimes PR professionals write the quotes for people, for their lay readers, for their clergy, whoever it is, and then they get reviewed by the person who's quoted. I suggest you always make sure you have approval of the person you quoted. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but that's an important point because they have to answer for it. If they say something and it comes back to them, they have to be able to stand by whatever they've said. So it's important to make sure everybody's on the same page there. Another great tool, especially for events, small local events, is a media advisory. A media advisory is similar to a press release, but it's typically it's more like an invitation form of the who, what, when, where, why spelled out. So it looks like this. This is an example of an event that we co-sponsored at South by Southwest Music Festival. So you see that it's really written out like you would an invitation. And all the details there, including the address, make sure those details are clear because you don't want to have, if a journalist has to even go Google something to see the address, that could be the 1 minute extra it takes for them to say, oh, forget it, I don't have the information, I'm not going to bother. And I don't say that because journalists are lazy or anything like that. It's just because, like I said, they're so inundated that the better you can spoon feed the information, the better it is for you. So a media advisor usually has maybe a paragraph or 2 under the who, what, when, where portion, and that's sort of like the same kind of information you'd put in a press release, also written in an objective style. But the difference is just that this is a specific format for an event. And you would usually send a media advisory out a week or 2 before the event and follow up a day or 2 before. And also in follow-up, if you are sending it to broadcast like news programs, follow up the morning of, even sometimes 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, because news programs in particular vary all day, every day, depending on what event's happening, depending on breaking news. So if there's a slower news day and they're not sure what they're going to do and you send it to them that morning, they might say, oh yeah, there's this event going on. I didn't know if I was going to have time to cover it, but it looks kind of interesting. I'll check it out. So handling press at events. This is one thing that I find that smaller organizations, especially as many congregations are understaffed, this is one thing that sometimes gets missed, and it's really essential. If you invite press to events, you have to have somebody there assigned specifically to be the person handling press. That doesn't mean that has to be their only job, but there has to be one specific person that everyone on staff who's working an event knows is the press point contact person. The press should also, whoever gets a media advisory, an email, a press release about the event, should know that this is the contact. So when they arrive there, they can look for that person. It's helpful if you have signs directing media if there's a check-in place. This is for a larger event. A lot of times that's not relevant with a smaller event. And then the person that's at the event should have people already picked out on hand to give quotes. Maybe it's one of the rabbis. Maybe it's one of the lay leaders. Somebody that's on hand who has a good sense of the messaging that they want to communicate, and maybe you've gone over with them. Hopefully you've gone over with them talking points, things that you would say you could in practice, mock interviews. Those things are important because the last thing you want is to surprise a lay leader and say, oh, I have somebody here from the Daily News who'd like to talk to you about X, Y, Z, and your lay leader feels caught off guard or, you know, stumbles through, doesn't really know exactly what they should be saying. That's a bad situation for everyone involved. So try to avoid that by planning ahead of time. Always have information on hand, printed press kit, flyers, any bios that are applicable, and transcripts. Transcripts of remarks are really great if you can have them in advance. If somebody is winning an award or giving a speech, that's great for reporters to pull quotes from. And then also they don't have to sit there trying to scramble notes while the speaker's happening. So that's always, again, more spoon feeding, the better. And preparing a post-event press release in advance, it sounds a little contradictory, but you generally know what is going to happen at an event. Sometimes you already have quotes or you have speeches that are written ahead of time you can pull from. If you can write that press release before the event, have it ready to go to press send, you know, just right after or hours after the event, it's better because the news is fresh. It's in journalists' mind if they were there especially. And having that to them right away keeps it current. If you get a post-event press release out too late, nobody's going to care anymore. The other thing is to make sure you have somebody there taking pictures, high-resolution digital images, so that you can email these to the press. A lot of times I have writers call me and say, do you have a picture from the event? I need something. And if it's a print publication, they need it in high resolution. So having those on hand, or even better, posted to your website that can be downloaded, is excellent. So, I see a question on the question box. What about embargoes? So an embargo, a good question. An embargo is when you have news that you want to get out, but you can't announce it until a specific time. So for example, let's say somebody is donating a large amount of money to expand your education wing, and you can't announce it until the donor has announced it to the community, or there's some reason it can't be announced yet. You can write embargoed, you can write a note on the top of the press release that says embargoed until such and such date, or just embargoed until whenever, so that a reporter can get started on the story. If you have something that is very sensitive, which a lot of time, embargoed information is very sensitive, I would follow up with a phone call, an email, and make sure, underscore, that it's embargoed and when the embargo will be lifted, which could be like after a board meeting or something like that. But that allows a journalist to get started on a story, especially if it's a bigger story that could take weeks to research, depending on what it is. You want them to get started early, but you definitely don't want them talking about it. And journalists, I would say, it's sort of like the Hippocratic Oath for a doctor. The journalist really has to respect an embargo. If they don't, it's really horrible journalism, and that happens at times. The same thing goes for when you say something, quote, off the record. There are journalists who break that and will print something. So you really have to be careful. And that's going back to the knowing your media and cultivating those relationships. If you really cultivate those relationships, you get a sense of who will honor an embargo, who will honor an off-the-record background comment, and who won't. So those relationships are integral. Let's see, responding to breaking news. So a lot of times I find that people are really sort of they keep thinking about how do I get news about my event out, how do I pitch, how do I write a press release, but they don't think as much about how to respond to journalists' requests. And sometimes they don't even like those. They shy away from them. I don't want to be quoted on this, or we don't know what we're talking about. Sometimes people feel, well, this is too controversial. My feeling is that breaking news, responding to journalist inquiries about breaking news or just general longer stories that they're writing is like a gift. They're coming to you. They want to know what you have to say. That means they think that you're a credible source. They value your voice or the voice of your leadership. And it's an opportunity to get your name or names of your leaders out there in the press. If it's a controversial topic, it can be a little tricky, but there's usually a way to make a comment without taking sides. And if you ever have a situation where a press person comes to you and you're not sure if you should answer or what you should answer, feel free to call me and talk it over with me. I might not have the answer for you, but I'll try my best, or I'll talk to others on our staff who may have a better answer or help work through the topic. We get a lot of those kind of calls, so we work through that a lot. So responding to breaking news, just to go back, is, if there's something happening in the news, a lot of times this happens when there's a tragedy, whether domestic or in Israel, or there's some kind of hate crime. Of course, these are times when people come to Jewish leaders to have a response. Or sometimes it's, I don't know if I'd call this breaking news, but when there's a Jewish holiday or some kind of a Jewish event, if they want sort of a, what's the local perspective? Responding to inquiries. You may receive inquiries about any kinds of things. Sometimes they're completely irrelevant, and you just have to say this isn't something that we deal with. This is not our, this isn't our expertise. A lot of times, even if they come to us with an inquiry and it's not something that we have expertise in, the best thing to do in that case is to refer them to somebody who does. Again, it's showing that you're a good resource, you delivered for them. The worst thing you can do is just not answer. Even if your answer is no comment, it's better than not answering. I think you want to be known as somebody who respects journalists' inquiries. You respond to them in a very prompt manner, and like I said, always respond. If you get an inquiry, it's important to really understand what the question is, how they're going to use it, what's the nature of the story. Because sometimes an inquiry can sound really benign, and in fact it's sort of a, the kind of piece you don't necessarily want to be associated with. You want to really have an understanding of where the story is going. And again, this goes with knowing a reporter, knowing their style. You know some reporters who are really sweet and all their stories are lovely, local community story, feel-good pieces. And then there are some reporters that have a sort of gotcha style. And knowing that really helps you prepare for how to respond to those kind of inquiries. Make sure you have a spokesperson on hand who knows how to speak to the press. Doing media training is more important than I can say. It's underutilized in most organizations, again, because of time, resources, expertise, but it's really important that your senior staff know, or lay leaders know, how to speak to the press, can develop quick, concise message points, keep it simple, and another point about that is how to deal with something that you don't know. Do you answer? Do you make up something? Obviously you don't, but sometimes people get stuck in the moment and they fumble through it. Teaching people that they can always say, you know what, I'm not sure, I'll get back to you, or that's a very good question, I have to think about it, can I get back to you? Those are all completely acceptable answers. And another answer that I don't advise all the time, but if absolutely necessary, if you're cornered, stuck, and you feel like you don't know what to say, you're uncomfortable, you're worried about saying the wrong thing, you can say something like, oh no, I forgot I have a meeting right now, and can I call you back tomorrow, or I'll call you back later, and then go regroup, or talk to somebody else on staff, get it together, or call them. I've had to do that on occasion just because sometimes you can have a very aggressive reporter who keeps asking, and it sort of will keep asking the same question in a different way, and there's only so many ways to dodge a question. And when that happens, you sometimes just have to find a way to get off the phone. As I said before, show, don't tell. Make sure you use anecdotes, stories, facts, and statistics to illustrate your point. Another great set of tools for getting your name out and get out your leaders to be known as opinion makers in the community is to write op-eds and letters to the editor. So op-eds, you usually see on the section of the paper either called opinions or editorials or op-eds. And those are usually a longer piece that is designed for a leader to say their point of view on something. Often it's something very timely in the news or controversial, but it's their opinion on what should be done. It usually you need to feel like there's an action item they're asking for. And it sort of starts out, this is the situation, this is what we need to do about it. It's a call to action. Letters to the editor are usually shorter, and they're often a response to something, usually a response to something that was either written in an article in the paper or written in another editorial in the paper. And again, they're a way to show that your leaders are important figureheads, important opinion makers, thought leaders in the community. So here's a little more details about op-eds and tips on letters to the editor. The stand message, take a strong stand. They are, the opposite of a press release, which is objective. A letter to the editor or an op-ed is definitely subjective. It should very clearly communicate an opinion. It's better if it's from one person, or maybe, if it's two organizations or two congregations writing something together and they want to show, or even more, sometimes to show unity of minds, it's good to have more than one name. But oftentimes, I wouldn't do, several names from the same organization. That sort of weakens it. And it's important to establish the voice of the person who is most likely going to be the voice of an op-ed, which, would often be your senior rabbi or senior lay leader. And always include weekend and night contact numbers on anything you send to the press, especially when it's an op-ed or letter to the editor. Oftentimes these things happen on the weekends, unfortunately for us, but you have to be prepared. I include my cell phone number on most things I send out, and I have it on my voicemail in case people need to find me. Some people might find that an invasion. I don't, but to be honest, it's so rarely used. They use it only, I find that journalists respect that and use it only if they're really on a tight deadline. Never send a form letter just means if you have a letter, sort of an op-ed that you think could go in, any number of different newspapers, you don't want to send the same thing. It's sort of like you send it to one place that's geared toward that publication. If they turn it down, then you could send it to another place and you tweak it for that publication. And you definitely don't want the same thing to run in 2 or 3 or 4 different publications. Somebody asked on the question box, I see, will you post the PowerPoint slides? Yes, Adam will be taking care of that. They will be posted on our YouTube channel, I believe. So, and you'll be able to look at them. The final thing I have here is a really important point, I think, with any project, but it's often overlooked, especially in PR, because it's hard to do in PR, but it's to evaluate your progress. PR is sort of immeasurable. Sometimes you can't tell exactly how, first of all, how something happened. Was this newspaper article a result of my pitching and my press release, or would they have written it anyway? That's one point. You don't always have the answer to that. Sometimes you do. Sometimes I talked to that person, I pitched this idea, we arranged an interview, and it resulted in a story. When that happens, it's lovely, and you can say, look what I did, it's wonderful. But it doesn't always happen so clearly. The other aspect of evaluation that's really hard with PR is how much good PR impacts your congregation. How can you tell whether that article made any difference in the public's thought about the organization, or did that article influence anybody to come to the event? If you have events, you can do surveys. How did you find out about this event? But a lot of times you can't really analyze it so succinctly. However, there is one way that PR professionals sometimes analyze that kind of coverage, which is to take, if you have, let's say, there's an article that mentions your organization, you measure the column inches that article takes up, and you see what the equivalent column inches would be in advertising costs. And then, so you have an idea of what that would cost to have that much space devoted to you in advertising, which is usually pretty expensive. The part that you really can't measure at all is like I said, the value of editorial coverage, which is generally thought to be greater value than advertising because of the importance people place on editorial coverage. When people read things, they feel like it's more, it's researched, it's a more objective point of view. If you're putting something in an advertisement, obviously it's not objective. You're promoting your own congregation, your own event, etc. So people know that, and they read editorial coverage with a different tone. And it's also important to keep your news front and center. So to make sure you have it on your website, you can have it. You can have a scrolling feed on your homepage, or you could have an in the news section or press section on your website. But to keep it out there, to show that the more you're in the news, the more relevant you seem to the general public, and the more relevant you are, truthfully. So keeping that front and center is an important tool in your marketing and communications. And I think that's all on my end. I'm very happy to take questions now, or again, as I said, anytime by email or phone, or if you're in New York and want to meet in person, I'm happy to do that too. I really enjoy speaking with the professionals at congregations and helping you achieve your PR goals. So if there are any questions, feel free to, I'll give you a few minutes to post them, and we'll take a look. So somebody posted a question, written press only, are younger folks reading? It is a good question. And this is why I would emphasize really getting to know your local bloggers, really utilizing social media, and I encourage all of you to attend Kate Bigham's social media webinar, which Victor can tell you the date. I think it's in May. But it's more and more and more becoming the norm that reading online, getting your news online is the way to go. Also, however, people are still reading what's in print, and oftentimes it's the same reporters who are writing the print pieces and the online pieces. So you're pitching to the same people. I mean, the best outcome is that you get double coverage. You get coverage in something, on the online newspaper and in the print paper. There are still a lot of people reading the print newspaper. But it's just that now we have more tools, so the more we have online, the more we have to pitch that way too. Oh, somebody asked, what is high resolution for pictures? So that means the pictures are good enough quality that they can be used for a print publication. A lot of times people who are taking digital images, especially if you don't have a professional photographer and you're taking a digital image with a digital camera or an iPhone or something like that, if you don't have it set on high resolution, it will take an image that would be completely acceptable for a website or for online use, because the resolution of computers is different than what you need to print a picture in a newspaper or magazine, which has to be a lot less pixelated. It's what has to basically a higher quality image. And you can ask somebody for help with looking at your camera or your phone if it's somebody using a regular camera, not a professional photographer. Yes, a recording will be available. Okay. Let's see, another question. Oh, can you please give some examples of illustrations in press releases? I'm not sure I understand the question. Is the question, like I was saying, to illustrate a point? I think I meant that, not literally an illustration like a picture, but illustrating through your words, to have a quote that tells a story more about the event or the initiative or whatever it is that you're trying to promote, to illustrate the point, meaning just to give it more color, to be less objective. But I wouldn't put illustrations. Sometimes people include images like photos in press releases, and that's okay. But I don't see any data for illustrations in a literal way. The other thing is, I might have mentioned this, but I want to make sure I underscore it, to always either use to send your press releases, either use mailing, like a mail client, which is sent out in a specific way through software, or copy and paste into an email. Never send a press release as an attachment. The press do not like to open attachments, mostly because of fear of viruses. But it's also just 2 more clicks that they might not take the time to do. So I would say include everything in an email, in the body of an email. Oh, what is the actual, I see the question, sorry. Somebody wrote, they understand what high resolution is, but what is the actual resolution that papers want? I think it's usually 300 dpi is the number that sticks out in my head, but it depends on the publication. It depends on their art department, so you really need to check with them, and that varies. Somebody has, this is a great question, can you get too much exposure? I don't think you can get too much exposure, but you can get too much of the wrong exposure. If you have, I mean, too much of a good thing, I don't really see that. But there's definitely too much of a bad thing. If you're having things written about you that aren't positive, I think 1 is too much. It happens, and you know, some people say all publicity is good publicity. I don't necessarily agree with that. There's definitely too much. If there's somebody, you know, if there's some kind of intercongregational politics going on and people are writing about that, that's not a good thing. If, I don't know, there's all kinds of things that could be written that aren't good, and I definitely think that's too much. And if you get into a situation where you're having a problem like that, you know, again, feel free to call us and we'll try to brainstorm on how to help you with that. Let's see, I'm looking at the other questions. This is a great question. What are biggest reasons why media won't cover your stories? I think the biggest reasons are either there's just too many other stories, and I mean, you know how thinly spread congregations are in terms of staffing. Media outlets are the same. They have too many people doing too few people doing too many jobs, and they just can't get to everything. Doesn't mean they're not interested or your story is not important. It's usually that's the case, especially with the Jewish community papers or the smaller papers. They're just, or when I say papers, I sometimes mean blogs, outlets in general. So that's often it. But the other reason I think that you don't get coverage, that people don't get coverage a lot, is because they're like sort of shooting in the dark. They think anything that they're talking about is going to be of interest because they're so inside their own world and what their priorities are, and they're not really thinking enough about the pitch from the perspective of the journalist's point of view and the reader, the audience point of view, who's going to be watching that. And what would be the bigger picture? I find that, you know, and this happens to me too, sometimes you're so in your own world and you have this myopic view that is not, that can't express clearly why is this important for the general public, besides an event that's going on that, you know, has a specific time frame, but an initiative like where do we fit in the big picture? I think that's a lot of reason why things don't get covered. And the other one I'd say is that journalists often tell me that they're getting pitched the wrong stories or it's going to the wrong people and somebody's not paying attention to what they actually write, and then they get frustrated and then they sort of will blacklist you. Like if they get too many emails of things that aren't relevant to them and they feel like it feels like spam. They feel like they're being spammed and then they just won't pay attention to anything you send them. So that's a big risk. How do you find local bloggers? Again, I'm going to recommend everyone get on Kate Bigham's social media webinar, and she'll have comments about this. But the best way I found to find local bloggers is really to just search, read bloggers, and also every community has its bloggers, and they're kind of people that know. Survey some of your friends, survey your colleagues, survey people you know who are really social media savvy, who read a lot on the internet. Ask them who are the bloggers to know. There are also, I know Kate can tell you about local, I think there are really specific search engines for blogging that will work. But it's kind of like looking, you know, at your community websites and seeing who's posting on there. I think that's the best advice I can give. But tapping your own resources of people within your community who are the people in the know. They know the best local blogs. They know the best places to, send things. I think I've answered all the questions. Somebody asked again if they'll have access to the slides, and yes, there will be a recording of the whole webinar, including all the things I said, but also you'll be able to see the slides. Is there anything I missed? Any last questions? And again, if we didn't get to your question here, or something comes up later that you didn't think of, or you have a new situation in a week, a month, a year, feel free to contact me.